Hi everyone, I'm Eric Kohn. I'm the artistic director of the Southampton Playhouse, and I'm very excited and honored to be joined today by Maria Cooper Janis, whose father, of course, was Gary Cooper, not only one of Hollywood's greatest performers of all time, but a resident of Southampton for part of the year and someone who rests just a few minutes from our doorstep. And in our very first edition of the Gary Cooper Festival, we will be celebrating your father's work across a range of films that he did. But before we get into all of that, I'd really love to hear from you, Maria, about your relationship to your father's fame as a child and when you realized for the first time that beyond being your father, he was, of course, a face that was familiar to many moviegoers around the country and the world.
Right. Well, I think my parents very intelligently probably kept me away from all that. I never saw him in a movie until my seventh birthday, and we had a little party at home, and we had a 16 millimeter projection machine. We didn't have a projection room, and we ran the movie The Plainsman with Paulette Goddard. So that was the first time I ever saw my father on the screen. And it was the first time I saw him in action, so to speak, and the first time I saw him tortured. and But it was an incredible life lesson because here we're sitting in our living room, and I'm watching, and on the screen, my father's being hung over a bonfire with his hands tied like this and lowered into the fire to make him talk. And I freaked out, uh, understandably. And I turned around and looked behind me, and my father was running the projection machine. And he saw my face, obviously looking rather distressed. And it was the greatest moment. I will never forget it. He looked at me and he smiled and he winked. He gave a very certain wink and sort of half laughed, half smiled. And when I turned back to the screen, it was sort of instant. Okay, that's reality. This is fantasy. On the screen was fantasy, and the whole the whole dynamic of movies and uh, the stories and everything. Just the difference became so clear to me at the age of 7, and I never had any other issues about that kind of um, confusion about life and what's real, what's not real. Well, it sort of was pretty
You
clear.
immediately grasped the concept of acting and reality versus
Y-
fiction, as it were.
Yeah, yeah.
That's fascinating. Well, in our first year for this festival, we're showing three different films from your father's work: Ball of Fire, High Noon, and Pride of the Yankees, which are very different kinds of films, and I think really showcase the remarkable range that your father had and the kinds of projects that he chose over the years that
Well,
resonated.
I'm I'm very glad that you've made this threesome, so to speak, as a launching pad because it gives a wonderful range and Ball of Fire. I think it's been an underrated film, even in terms of those who are classic Hollywood fans, because my father loved comedy. I mean, it wasn't slapstick pie on the face comedy, but he loved comedy, and he's so good in this film, in Ball of Fire. So I'm glad it'll give the audience a chance to rediscover him in that kind of a role. And then, of course, High Noon is obvious, and Pride of the Yankees is just classic forever kind of a film.
Yeah, and they all speak to different audiences and different sensibilities, and also it seems to your father's interests. I noticed in your book you talk about his relationship with Fred Zinnemann and High Noon. It's a film that has lasted the ages in so many ways, and it seems like whatever point in time you watch it, it seems to be very relevant to the times that we're living in. Um,
Isn't that strange? Yes, maybe unfortunately,
Unfortunately,
but
but
it's true.
also it can be constructive at the dinner table. But but I wonder how much of that you were aware of and thought about over the years.
Oh, yes, certainly. I mean, and I think that's probably one of the reasons my father wanted to do it because it wasn't certainly wasn't a big budget picture, and but there was something special about it. Of course, the opportunity for him to work with Fred Zinnemann was very dear to his heart because Fred was a close family friend. But I mean, I think High Noon really speaks to human nature. It isn't a Western or an Eastern or a foreign. It's whatever. It's basic human behavior, and I think the way the way Carl Foreman constructed the screenplay and took the story, but he actually took the name of the town, Hadleyville, from a short story by Mark Twain, and the town in Twain's short story was, if it wasn't Hadleyville, it was very, very, very close. But the characteristic of the town, there were many similarities, but again, it's similarities to the groupies in human nature that we fall into or form. Um, so it's relevant, eternally
And
relevant.
when a film like that came out, did you speak much with your father about what it meant, what was going on in the background, or why he wanted to do these films, or did you just sort of experience them, as they came to you?
Well, my father was never one to, if I could say, bring his work
Hmm.
home, in quotes. I'm sure he and my mother spoke about it, but I never was part of that kind of a hemming and hawing, or should I, shouldn't I? You know, I like this. Uh, he was asked many times what makes him choose the roles that he takes, and his answer was pretty very simple. He said, "I want to choose. I want to try to portray the best a man can be."
Hmm.
So the one picture, and sadly, it was the last movie he made, called The Naked Edge, and the film was kind of a bust because the whole premise was that the audience had to believe that the Gary Cooper character was um, a murderer, and the audience wouldn't buy it from the get-go. And the studio tried all sorts of tricks, marketing, and this nobody, they just wouldn't go for it. So, and I remember reading that Sam Goldwyn, early on in my father's career, gave him some advice. He said, Coop, he said, you must never let your audience down.
Hmm.
And clearly, part of that was their expectation of who your character is supposed to portray and how you've developed your character to be um, the best a man can be.
Yeah, that's fascinating as well. I mean, I'd be curious to know how, it affected your father when a film didn't work as much as when one did, because of that pressure, knowing that there is an audience invested in the work that you do. I'm sure that must have been something that he struggled with sometimes, right?
Well, that picture was the last movie that he made, so I can't think of any roles. I mean, there were many roles that he was annoyed with himself at how he was in it. I mean, that was from a strictly artistic acting point of view. He was, discontented, or he didn't like the way it worked, or maybe the director was hard to work with, and that wasn't a good marriage. uh, but he really, uh, he he was very consistent in uh, in sticking to his own principles, and that the characters he chose would be people who tried to live their life with those principles. I mean, we're all human and we're all very flawed, and certainly that happened in in the stories. But it was a basic attempt to always reach higher.
On that front, let me ask you quickly about Pride of the Yankees, because I think something quite beautiful about this film is that it depicts a man trying to live his life under the best possible circumstances, and even when he faces a literal end to all of that, he treats the end as the greatest moment in his life, and of course that became an iconic line that today is the greatest moment of my
Hmm.
existence, of my life. And that feels like something that must have been personal to your father as well. And I wonder how that project, looks to you now when you look back at it. If you see any sort of connections between, who your father was and who Lou Gehrig is in that movie.
Well, I think in trying to look at the whole range of his career, I think there was a consistency, again, with who he was as a person, um, who he was as an actor, and uh, as life throws more curves than home runs, probably. Certainly the Lou Gehrig story is an unbeatable uh, uh, lesson or exercise in courage and grace under pressure, whatever cliche you want to use. Um, he did a tour of the South Pacific during the war, and he was very embarrassed because he was touring with Bob Hope and uh, Betty Grable, and it was a lot of cha cha cha, funny and jokes, and he felt very insecure. And he said to the colonel, one of the first bases that they stopped at, he said, I don't dance, I can't tell jokes. What am I going to say to the guys? When there'll be like 1,000 guys sitting on the ground and in front of him. And the colonel said, and in the different places they stopped. Um, the guys and women, they all want you to recite the Lou Gehrig speech. So here he is, I've got a wonderful little photograph of him sitting under a tent, pouring rain, and he was trying to scribble down from memory the exact words that Lou Gehrig spoke, and then standing up and delivering it to the troops, and every place they asked for it. And think of, these are guys who were going out, and many of them would never come back, and they knew it. So it was a great, great parallel, human sort of soul connection.
It's really wonderful, and
There.
I think it's also it epitomizes the effect that film can have on the world beyond the screen as well. And on that note, let's talk about Southampton because your book beautifully describes your father's outdoorsmanship, his love for nature, all of that coming out of this childhood in Montana, whether, not just being a hunter, but somebody who appreciated the beach, the wildlife, so forth. And I wonder, of all the places that you can take that impulse to, how did Southampton become the place that your family spent so much time?
Oh. Well, it came about, I guess, organically because my mother's family was from there. I mean, they had a house when my mother was in her early teens. Her mother remarried. They built the house that I grew up in, to the extent that I visited there, on Ox Pasture Road, and it's still there. It's today. It has a different name. The the house wasn't named when our family was in it, but it's the house that's there today, and it looks, except a little different color paint job, it looks the same.
It's
There are a few less trees, um, and my grandfather was an avid golfer, so he had a pitch and putt green on one part of the lawn, and then the house had a tennis court in the back. They did not have a swimming pool, but I spent summers there because my mother and father, if he wasn't doing a film, he would uh, love escaping to Southampton because he loved the ocean, loved the beach. My mother too, of course. Time with our family, and they were very young. My grandparents were very young grandparents, so um, there was a total camaraderie. And then in those days, of course, the Hamptons were much, much less built out. I mean, there were still potato fields and cabbage fields behind our property. And my father, he'd disappear all afternoon, um, driving with his binoculars, and he was looking for osprey nests because he loves spotting birds. Not only, I mean, not to shoot as game as pheasants, because he did duck and pheasant shooting, but he just loved to find nature. So the ospreys, I guess there are not too many eagles out in the
Right.
Hampton area
Right.
because he loved the eagle. Was kind of his American Indians speak. I would say the eagle was his spirit bird, but uh, there was just everything about Southampton, particularly then. It was not built up at all.
It's very interesting too because you mentioned in your book about your father's affinity for Native American culture, and of course, Southampton is very close to the Shinnecock Nation. So I wonder if
Uh
he
huh.
ever had any relationship to the community out on that.
You know, not that I know of, which is it's an interesting point. If he did, I didn't know about it.
That connection is something I think of value to us as we consider his legacy in Southampton, and the fact that we do share this land with an indigenous community. So it's great that you include that detail in remembering his legacy. I'm also really curious about what it was like for your father to visit all these different places. I understand he went to the beach club. He went to Catena's, the seafood place.
Katina, the
Katina, the
fish
fish
market.
market,
Oh
which I
yeah, yeah.
visited today. They're very excited for you to come visit. They keep your book in the store
Oh, I'd
too.
like to see them.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, it was a very sweet moment when my mother and Dr. Condorus, her second husband, built the house which we had right on Pond Lane until my mother died. My husband and I just sold it a couple of years ago. But when my mother built their house on Lake Agawam, um, we decided to move my father's remains from the cemetery, from Holy Cross Cemetery in Santa Monica, out to Southampton because, in fact, that's where the family was. So, so the day came, and the hearse arrived from the airport with the coffin with my father. So there was it came to our house first, and then so it was the hearse, my mother and I in the car, my mother's companion, two close friends, and I guess she had ordered some food for after a little supper we had from Katina's. And as we drove out going to the cemetery, all of a sudden the Katina fish market delivery truck pulls out, and he said, "Can we join you?" And my mother said, "Come on." So it was wonderful. This funeral cortege with leading up the rear was Katina's market.
Yes.
And we went out to the cemetery and, had a little
It's a
ceremony.
wonderful
So
escort, and I understand.
wonderful.
And
And I tell you, my father could put away 3 or 4 dozen clams at one sitting. I mean, given the chance. And he was pretty keen on 2 or 3 lobsters too. He had a big appetite.
we'll have to do some sort of clam bake one year for this festival to remember.
Oh, well, that would be that would be great. That would be wonderful.
So where else
And then,
would you say that he liked to spend his time when you were all there? I mean, I assume
well, of course, whenever we arrived from California, the first place in town that we would hit or tell my grandmother we got to we got a plan to hit Crutchley Crullers first of all, and that's I don't know what store is it a drugstore now? That's it's
I believe there's a Cinderella on that street.
right where it used
Yeah.
to be. Just it was I think almost opposite Saks Fifth Avenue. No, 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 no. That's wrong. Uh, Opposite the corner where you get off of Main
Yeah.
Street and you head as if you're going out to
Yeah,
the
you're talking
island.
about Crutchley's Crullers. Yeah.
I'm talking about Crutchley
Yeah.
Crullers, and I remember I remember Mr. and Mrs. Crutchley. I mean, they were a Norman Rockwell couple. If you know the Norman Rockwell
Yeah. Yeah.
paintings depicting sort of Americana at its
Holding a
best.
pitchfork and everything.
Yeah, but Mrs. Crutchley, she had her white hair back in a bun and sweet, sweet face, and always dressed in white and the powdered sugar all over the place. But they were, and so when we would go back to California, we would go ahead and order like 4 dozen uh, cruller holes. The cruller holes were very
That's
special.
great. So you hit the crullers, and then were there any other restaurants or bars?
Um, well, we'd go to Silver's cigar store,
Sure. Which is now Dopo
drugstore.
Argento. Yep.
What is it
It's
called
called
now?
Dopo Argento. It's a restaurant. Dopo Argento is Italian for after silver, so they kept the like.
Oh, that's
Isn't that
lovely.
great?
I love
Yeah.
it.
So
Yeah.
it's
Oh,
still
yeah.
that's still there. And was there? Did you ever go
Yeah.
to Shippy's? Was that a
Oh,
sure?
sure. Oh,
Great.
yes. Oh, goodness. Yeah. So Shippy and my mother and father had a lot of mutual friends, so they were sharing stories like war stories,
Oh
a
wow.
different kind of
Different
war,
guy of
but
war. Yeah.
uh,
And I have to ask, did you ever make it to our movie theater?
oh, we went a lot, of course. Oh my goodness. Yeah, I remember standing in line a whole lot, and we would go to the movies, and we just stood in line like everybody else. It wasn't a Mr. Cooper
Yeah,
come in and
yeah.
jump the
No
line.
VIP treatment. Did you go see
No,
his own movies here or just others?
occasionally. I mean, it wasn't necessarily what was playing when we were there, but because uh, he did a lot of he he played a lot of golf and tennis at the Meadow Club, and we would usually spend about 2.5 to 3 hours every morning, like from 11 to 1, 2 hours, I guess, at at the beach club. And we'd either have lunch at the beach club, hot dogs and hamburgers and that, or we'd go back to the Shields' house. My grandparents, the name was Paul Shields, and my grandmother was Veronica Shields, and she was everybody adored her. I mean, all the salespeople in all the shops, everyone just adored her, and they would come down and spend the whole summer. I
That's
mean,
wonderful.
and then when uh, well, they never had air conditioning because when my mother was a teenager, she lived in that house because her mother had remarried then, and Paul, her new husband, had that they built the house, and so my mother's childhood really until she was 18 and she went out to California was spent in Southampton in the summertime.
Hmm.
So it was natural that the Coopers summer vacation or between movies, my father would come out there, and he just loved it because he had everything. He had the ocean, the beach, swimming. He could go hunting. What is you know the name? It's called the Port of Missing Men.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Uh, so that family, the Millicent, but the Millicent Rogers' son, I think, owned it, and that was kind of a pheasant
Yeah.
preserve,
So you'd hunt
and,
pheasants there?
and I it was a hunting lodge. I don't know, maybe duck and pheasant.
Yeah.
So my father would go and do some game shooting
Wow.
there. I mean, he only shot things to eat,
Oh wow.
not for trophies,
Sustenance.
so to speak. Yeah.
That's beautiful.
And my mother actually, she was the person, if I can say it. This must have been in the mid 50s or early 50s, actually early 50s. I think she really introduced the new modern surfboards to Southampton because we were very close in California to Peter Lawford, the British actor who was married to Patricia Kennedy,
Hmm.
who had a house right on First Neck
Hmm.
Lane. For recently, I mean, I would say up up until Pat was ill and died, but Peter was a big surfer, and he knew all the surfing crew from his friends in Malibu, which was a big surfing spot in California, and also from Hawaii, and those were the first guys who made the fiberglass surfboards that were light.
Mm.
because before that the surfboards were all redwood and heavy,
Right.
lifeguard stuff, but not for sport. So so my mother had a special board made for her, and she brought it to Southampton. And to see my mother walking down the beach club with the surfboard on her shoulders, everybody, their jaws dropped.
So was your father a good surfer?
No, no, he never did actually, because when he was very young, if you remember reading in the book, but when he was a teenager, living in Montana, he was driving in a specially fitted Jeep with a friend, a school friend, who had had polio, and there was a stick shift. It was a strange arrangement, and they flipped the car, and the car flipped, and my father, and he had a broken hip, and he never went to a doctor. The hip just mended terribly, so he couldn't straddle a surfboard and leap to his feet. It wouldn't have been possible.
Wow.
And that's why he had to, in later years, he had to choose the horses he rode very carefully, because if the horse had too broad a back, and he was a hell of a rider. I mean, he could stick a horse bareback like nobody, but he had to have a kind of narrow backed
Wow.
horse.
What might have been though to see Gary Cooper riding a surfboard, that would have been an iconic image in American
Well,
culture. Um,
yeah, that was, well, he passed that banner to my mother.
I love that. Well, I also wonder about what it was like for your father just to be around Southampton as a recognizable figure. I mean, you mentioned in the book, these were days before the sort of crush of paparazzi. And certainly today, it's even more aggressive. Everyone wants to take, photos on their phones and things like that. But
Mhm.
what was it like in a town like Southampton for your father to be famous and recognizable? How often was he approached, and how did he handle that?
Um, I wouldn't say there was ever an approaching problem. He was always very approachable, and people, I would say, they granted him the same respect that he granted them. He always liked to be kind to kids, and go out of his way if someone came up and said, uh, you know, "Oh, my granddaughter wants your autograph." Well, she was clearly 6 years old and couldn't have cared less, but she wanted the autograph. But he was it was low key. People didn't make a big fuss about him, um, and he became kind of a regular, if you will. Uh, so it wasn't a big deal.
Well, speaking of not a big deal, I do think there is something striking about visiting the Southampton Cemetery where your father is buried, because there are certain celebrity graves that have big monuments and all kinds of intricacies. It's a very humble uh, stone in the ground, and I'm curious about sort of
Mhm.
the decision behind that, and perhaps there's some additional context you can give folks.
Well, yes, it was that stone was was due to my mother's choosing, because I believe my father wasn't around, and because wanting to give my father something there that was in keeping with his background, the West, nature, rocks, boulders, mountains. Well, there are no mountains, but boulders. And we would go down to Montauk and hike around and whatever. So she went down to, I think there's is it called the Bistrian Rock Quarry at at the end of Montauk. So my mother went down. I wasn't with her. She went down herself, and she chose that stone, and she brought it back. I mean, she had it moved back, and she had to get permission from the church. And it was a bit of a problem in the beginning, because there were apparently cemetery rules about things have to be gray and vertical and da 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 da. And she was discussing with the pastor at the time. I don't remember who it was, and he said to my mother, "No, we have to. There are these rules." So my mother, God bless her, she said, "Father," she said, "didn't Jesus say Thou art Peter, and upon this rock I will build my church. And you're telling me I can't have a simple rock to mark my husband's resting place?
Well played.
There's the rock.
Sometimes knowing your Bible verse is all it takes.
Yeah,
I
exactly.
love that. So let me ask you this: we are continuing the legacy of your father in Southampton by establishing a festival. What do you think is important
That's
for
beautiful.
people to know about him? You know, especially because we want to bring new audiences to his films, not just those who are already familiar with these types.
Yeah, of course. Well, I mean, I think you started off with a wonderful uh, structure or a wonderful idea. Mixing up a comedy, a western, and
Sports movie.
yeah, it's sports, and particularly baseball. Um, so to the extent that you can follow up, next season with um, a mixture of films. I don't know. One of them I might suggest, which was one of the last pictures he did, actually, was The Hanging
Okay.
Tree, which is an interesting western, and the story interested him because it takes place in Montana during the gold rush. So he had an affinity because Montana in 1901, when my father was born, and those early years, there was still, it wasn't gold rush fever, but the remnants were all around, and it's part of what built Helena into the major city that it became. It was the first movie. It was the first movie George C. Scott
Okay.
made, and Carl Malden was in it, wonderful, wonderful actor, and Maria Schell, wonderful German actress. So, I think it's sort of it's it's a very different western, and he plays, the character's name is Joe Frail, F-R-A-I-L, and he's a doctor who has a past,
Okay.
and he's fled the Midwest to come to the West, and that's so the story goes on. But it's a bit of a different casting. I think every actor wants to stretch his capacity to portray different characters, and certainly my father did. So I think that's one film maybe you can
Yeah,
consider
absolutely.
with your next
You
mix.
are welcome to be a
Uh,
part of our programming committee anytime. So
may I? Okay, I'd
you're
love to
hired.
do that. Thank you.
I
Okay,
love
done.
that. Um, and off of that, just to kind of bring this full circle. I mean, what do you think is so important about your father's legacy that resonates today? Are there actors or aspects of his films that you think are important to connect the dots to? I mean, obviously Tom Hanks wrote the introduction to your book, and there is something about Tom Hanks that seems relevant to your father's legacy. But is there anything else in there?
Well, very much that was the reason that I hopefully timidly wrote Tom and said, "Would you consider, doing the forward?" And I was so grateful because I think Tom's in his life, in his non-Hollywood life and in his Hollywood life, both he sort of has exemplified or lived the kind of way that my father would. My father was never caught up in the, how God, what's the word? Egotistic, I am an actor kind of mentality, and I I think my father's legacy was, excuse me, um, he loved the craft. He loved the challenge of trying to portray these different characters. He loved doing the research on the different roles, whether if they were real life people that he was portraying or a fictional character, but he really wanted to uh, get get behind who that person really was. I think someone quoted Stanislavski as saying that Gary Cooper was the best natural actor I've ever seen. Because, but he never had any theatrical training or anything, but he just did have a naturalness about him, and he felt, he really felt. Excuse me. I'm sorry. Sir. My father felt that if he really understood who the character was, he wouldn't have to be quote acting. He could deliver the dialogue with an honesty and a kind of integrity. There's a scene in High Noon, and it comes and goes so quickly, and I suspect most people don't get it because it passes so fast. But I think it's one of the important, not only messages of the film, it's a message of our behavior today, which is very stretched out, I can say. And it's, well, like, I guess I shouldn't say it because it's going to give away the story. Well, everybody knows.
They know
I
it.
know. Don't you
Yeah.
think? It's when all the bad guys are after him. He's left alone to fight them. The two henchmen have been killed, but Frank Miller, the leader, is stalking the marshal. So my father's hiding, and Miller is on the street. The marshal has a clear sight line right to Miller's back, and the marshal is hiding behind a column. And he doesn't take the cheap shot. He doesn't take the easy shot or the safe shot to save his own life. His moral conviction is you do not shoot a man in the back. And the marshal calls out Miller. And Miller turns around, and then Miller shoots from where the voice came, and my father shoots him. He kills Miller. Miller wounds the marshal. But that simple moment of calling Miller's name and not shooting him in the back to save his own skin, to save the marshal, to save his own skin, is, I think, one of the major points really in the whole movie. I mean, the whole movie makes an incredible point, but I think that is a key moment.
Wow.
And I hope the audience gets it.
Yeah, that's really actually I never realized that about High Noon. I mean, there are certain images that are so iconic, the music is so iconic in the overall scenario, but that subtlety is really a really wonderful point, and I can't wait to watch it again now, and discover that as every time I watch these films, there are more details that come alive to you. So thank you for doing that,
Right?
and Maria.
Well, that's the key one.
That's
I think.
wonderful. And honestly, I just want to thank you for this time, for speaking with us about your father's legacy, and for being a part of the first year in which we celebrate his films at this theater. It certainly won't be the last one.
Well, I hope not, and I'm grateful to you for getting this ball rolling, and congratulations on the new theater. I mean, that's really. I had many a bag of popcorn and an ice cream cone there.
Wonderful. We'll have to bring those for you when you come out to visit next weekend.